Hello, assalamu alaikum, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. Welcome to the second episode of our Resist series. This is a series on discussing on transnational repression from the Pakistani state and discussing the general democratic backsliding that's happened in Pakistan over the past few years. I'm very honored and very kind of have a fan. I'm having a fanboy moment to have Melka and Dr. Junaid here as our guests for the second episode. They're incredible activists, incredible scholars, incredible intellectuals who are one of the few people I think remaining in the Pakistani diaspora who are speaking up for what's right. So it's an incredible honor to have both of you on the program, and I'll leave it to you, Melka, to introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Sean, for having us. It's such an honor to be here with you alongside Junaid, who I'm also a big fan of. He is an incredible academic and activist. So, a real joy and honor to be here with you both. By way of background, I'm currently running an organization. It's a 501c4 advocacy group called Community Alliance for Peace and Justice. And we do a lot of advocacy work on US foreign policy, especially as it relates to South Asia and the Middle East, with a particular focus on Pakistan and Palestine. So our work is really to try and make our policymakers in Washington more accountable, and especially when it comes to policies advancing repression in Pakistan or the genocide in Gaza. We're trying to push them towards policies that strengthen civilian institutions and not ones that reinforce military authoritarianism or genocide or occupation in different parts of the world, but especially the ones that we're focused on. We also do public webinars, a lot of education. We're trying to educate the larger American community as well, so that they're also sensitized to some of the issues that some of the countries at the receiving end of pernicious US foreign policies feel, and are trying to make more allies and sort of build coalitions across various targeted communities to help us with our work. Prior to that, I actually ran an organization, which was a nonprofit organization called Critical Connections, and that was to counteract Islamophobia in the US, which had been rising quite rapidly since 9/11. So a lot of my work focused sort of domestically on how to make institutions here more responsive and to address anti-Muslim sentiment and anti-Muslim hate. My background initially when I started off my career was with think tanks. So I worked with the Council on Foreign Relations in New York and also the Center for Strategic and International Studies in DC. My academic training is in post-conflict peace building, how societies rebuild after civil war. So as you can tell right now, what I am doing is something very different from what I started off with. But I find it to be a real calling in this moment, especially in Pakistan's history, to sort of speak out for what's going on over there. And I can tell you other things, but I would love to shift that to Junaid, and maybe he can tell us about his background.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Sean and Malika. I mean, this seems like a mutual admiration society, and it's kind of hard to say anything after what Malika said. I mean, I feel like, I'm just a very kind of a humble activist on some side of the planet, but I have been teaching law, religion, and global politics for now nearly 2 decades. Spent a lot of time teaching in Pakistan. I still do on and off, but also in countries like Turkey, Malaysia, South Africa, and the US. I founded the Center for the Study of Islam and Decolonization in Islamabad. And we've done a lot of work in terms of decolonial thought, particularly within the Islamicate context and in the Muslim world. And of course, specifically over the past few years, two of the main issues have been both the genocide in Gaza and the rise of this military dictatorship in Pakistan, as it should be called. And so my activism, my writing, whatever intellectual output has largely been, or at least for the past few years, focused on these issues.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. And it seems like we have so much a repository of so much information that we can dig through in this call, but I'm sure we won't be able to get through all of it in an hour. But really looking forward to digging into some of our conversations. So I won't take much more time. I'll get started with our first kind of question or two to start off the conversation. This is for you, Mehlaqa. For people who may not be aware, you had received a notice from Pakistan cybercrime authorities back in Pakistan, I believe. So just to give an idea to the viewers of what type of transnational repression or what type of just general repression may be happening to activists in Pakistan, can you walk us through or give us some idea of how you received that notice and what happened?
Sure. So last October, my family home in Pakistan, which is in Peshawar, they received a notice from the National Cyber Crimes Investigations Agency, which accused me of spreading anti-state content on social media, and they demanded that I appear before them in person, or else I will have my identity seized, my land, my property, assets, and in case I fail to show up. The interesting thing about the notice, however, was that it didn't really specify what my actual crime was. There was a very vague reference to anti-state content. It also made a vague reference to Article 11 of PICA, which is the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act in Pakistan. It's generally known as the Cyber Crimes Law in Pakistan, which has been invoked repeatedly to target journalists and dissidents and critics of the military regime in Pakistan. And so that's what the notice said. When I received it a few days after it was delivered over there because nobody actually lives in that house. When I did receive it, I reached out to the agency, the Cyber Crimes Investigations Agency, through email and said, please specify what my actual violation is here. And I can't appear in person, but I'm happy to appear on Zoom and answer for myself whatever, I'm being charged with. I, of course, never received a response when that happened. And that, of course, is a very clear case of transnational repression. I know that your earlier episode sort of dealt with what transnational repression is, but just to reiterate, it is when foreign governments reach across their borders to intimidate and silence or harass critics of the regime, and they do so through a variety of different methods: digital suppression, legal notices, online trolling, all of those things. But also they sometimes become much more extreme and they target relatives of those abroad who are speaking out. So that's what happened over there. In response, when I received that, I did reach out to my congressional representatives here in the US. So both my senators and two of our congressional representatives wrote a letter to the Pakistani ambassador here in the US, sort of registering their concern around why their constituent was being targeted. They also never received a response to the letter that they had sent. So, I mean, that was an opportunity for the Pakistani government to say something or disavow the notice or whatever, but I mean, there was absolutely no response. So I think it just, even though my case was not at all harrowing. I mean, yes, receiving a legal notice is never fun. I can no longer go back to Pakistan. I have been advised by the FBI not to do that. And, something that we take for granted, going back to Pakistan every year. That's where I was born. That's where I was raised. But again, it's not too big a price to pay as compared to what other people have endured. I know, Sean, that your father, who's been so bold and so courageous about speaking out against military authoritarianism, he's been targeted. Other journalists like Muid Pirzada, Wajahat Said Khan, Adil Raja, also Shahzad Akbar Sahab in England, they've all been targeted. I think they've also received life sentences in absentia. But it just goes to show how far the Pakistani government is going to go to try and silence their critics. There are other people who aren't even big names. There was a TikToker just last year in Florida who was also targeted, and her brother was abducted because of her criticism of the military regime. And everybody knows about the case of Ahmad, who was a very famous journalist who last year came out with an investigative report on nepotism within the Pakistani military. Both of his brothers were abducted and subjected to all kinds of inhumane treatment. So, I mean, it just goes to show how far this authoritarian government in Pakistan is going to go to try and silence critics abroad.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, that's super unfortunate. And just I believe you'd be one person in a long list of people who've been harassed and intimidated by the Pakistani government over the past 4 or 5 years. And I see that Dr. Junaid just had to step out for a second, but I'll ask a follow-up question to you, Mehlaqa. So you mentioned that they had deemed you as anti-state. Did they specifically say what you said or what exactly they were calling you anti-state for?
Well, that's a great question, Sean, because I reached out to them and I asked them to specifically, identify posts or anything that I did that was they deemed anti-state. And of course, we never heard back from them. But I think that is part of what PICA is, the law, the cyber crimes laws that we've been referring to. And there are other laws as well in Pakistan that have sort of, in a very vague way, kind of criminalized any speech against the military. And, PICA, they have these very vague references to defaming or bringing into disrepute, phrases that don't really have a solid sort of meaning or interpretation. So, people can use them, prosecutors can use them, and it gives them a lot of discretion to deem anything defamatory or something that will bring the military disrepute. And although I should say that defamation is a lie, something that you say that is not exactly true. Everything that we've been saying against the Pakistani military is actually well documented. Their abuses of human rights and their atrocities that are taking place across the board in Pakistan, whether it's in Balochistan or KPK, enforced disappearances in Azad Kashmir, all of that is pretty well documented. So, it would be defamatory if it wasn't true, but everybody knows those to be true. So, so they came out, so they didn't actually specify what that was. So to this day, I really absolutely have no idea what they consider. But I will say one thing. I think the reason that they did, there are many, many people who are on social media and who say things against the military. However, I think the reason I was targeted, and this was in October, was because of my congressional advocacy. And because earlier in that summer of last year, I had worked with Congressman Jim McGovern's office, who had introduced the IMET amendment, which conditions military training to Pakistan on human rights. And I know when that happened, there was a lot of online trolling that happened. They made deep fakes of me, deep fake videos of me, and sort of spread that online as well. And that is very classically transnational repression, is when they do that, the smear campaigns, the online trolling, all of those things. So I think that was linked specifically to my congressional advocacy.
Thank you. So you've painted a pretty comprehensive picture of how the Pakistani state is behaving in the recent past and in these days. So I'll just jump to Dr. Ahmad, a question related to what Mehlaqa just mentioned. So we may be aware of what the Pakistani state looks like today, but for our viewers who are not that well versed with Pakistan as a country and how the government functions, would you describe Pakistan as a democracy today, or would you describe it as something different, such as a hybrid regime or something else?
Yeah, it probably would be something different than a democracy today. And, it's most of the viewers probably know this, but of course, the Pakistani military has always had this inordinate role in the political life of the country. And so, to be fair to the current field marshal, we have had previous dictatorships in the country as well. from Ayub to Yahya Khan to the Ziaul Haq to Musharraf and so on and so forth. And and so the country has attempted to call itself a democracy for quite a long time. And at various points in the country's history, it has made significant attempts to allow political space for political parties to emerge. And when I say allow political space, what I actually mean is that ordinary people, Pakistanis, fighting back against authoritarian and dictatorial rule and trying to advance political projects, political parties that would hopefully attempt to constrain that role of the military in the public life of the country. And of course, so that's not always been so successful. And one of the reasons has been that unfortunately Pakistan has also been cursed with some of the worst civilian politicians that you can imagine in the world. And so up until very recently, for ordinary Pakistanis, it really did not make a difference whether they were under military rule or the rule of the House of the Sharifs or the House of the Bhutto Zardari, leaving aside Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. That's a bit different. So I think that that's kind of like the context and the recent history in which you see the military without having to declare, and this is kind of the smart thing, without directly having to claim that we are now instituting martial law and this is military rule, but effectively going back and maybe even worse than prior periods of military dictatorship, establishing once again their control over political life in Pakistan. And the unfortunate thing is, that the class of civilian politicians they have are fully complicit, are their puppets at this particular period. So, I mean, that is the issue that semantically, no one is saying that this is a martial law regime, it's a military dictatorship, military rule, but this is probably one of the worst, darkest periods of authoritarian dictatorial rule in the country's history. So, I mean, all that aside, I think only the ideologically committed idiots would consider Pakistan a democracy right now if they just observe what's going on. I mean, we're going into the details of this. Our chief diplomat in the world is a field marshal, chief of defense forces, and the whole world is kind of like, wow, that's wonderful. And like elementary observation of this would be like, this is absurd. Where else do you see this in the world happening? But that gives you a sense. But it's not our fault that the international liberal media doesn't see the sham of this entire process. So no, I do not consider a democracy as, no matter how much Pakistani politicians, other than the ones associated with Imran Khan, say that it is.
A follow-up question for you, Dr. Ahmed. So you mentioned that this isn't the first kind of military-led regime or a military-aligned regime in the history of Pakistan. Do you have an idea as to why we kind of have these cycles of the civilian rule with the military ruling from the back versus more over straight dictatorial or straight authoritarian rule? Is there a reason why, I guess, the current regime thought this time it would be different than it was in the past?
Yeah, the source of course, all of this is the colonial state, right? Is from British colonialism, the overdeveloped state, as Hamza Alivi would call it, both in terms of the military and of course the bureaucracy. And over time, the bureaucracy was somewhat undermined, and its influence was not as great as the military. So the origin, of course, goes back to that, right? This overdeveloped state with an overdeveloped military. So I mean, that's something to be addressed generally. But as I said, that there are moments in Pakistan's history in which mass democratic uprisings took place. One of the biggest ones, of course, was in 1968. In fact, we speak about the world and in terms of the movements of the 60s and the ones that were, challenging power structures, empire, and so on. We should actually be quite proud that of Pakistan, which people don't, really focus on. That in fact, the '68 movement in Pakistan did get rid of a military dictatorship. It got rid of Ayub Khan, and so we have had movements in the past that have challenged military rule. But I think, like I said, apart from movements and political tendencies, which really did seem to be advancing the interests of the social majorities, say the Pakistan People's Party when it emerged under Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in the early '70s, or the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, which emerges under obviously the leadership of Imran Khan. Outside of that, as I was saying earlier, the class of civilian politicians have shown themselves to be so politically, morally bankrupt and corrupt that even when the population of Pakistan invests its hopes and desires in this cast of characters, they get thoroughly disappointed. And so then you have, for example, a military coup happened in 1999 by General Pervez Musharraf against Nawaz Sharif. But no one is kind of out in the streets saying, oh no, this is horrible. Why did Nawaz Sharif go? We need him back. No one really cared. For most ordinary Pakistanis, it was the same, for their, in terms of their socioeconomic conditions and even in terms of their political participation. And so that is why the military elite has been able to do this. And particularly, here's the interesting thing, in other provinces in Pakistan, other than Punjab, the Balochistan, KPK, and Sindh, for them, they've always had a very healthy skepticism, to put it mildly, towards the military because of the way the military has been undertaking operations there, assassinating leaders, and generally maintaining somewhat of a semi colonial relationship with these other provinces. And of course, with the part of Pakistan, East Pakistan, the result was the War of Independence and the creation of Bangladesh. But the other provinces have also felt that thing. In Punjab is where they've always expected for the people to love or at least respect the military. And I think that, again, we'll get into this. The problem this time is that this obviously overwhelming, not and population wise, but also politically dominant uh, province of Punjab, the cracks have, to put it mildly, have been taking place there, and Punjabis, for the first time, thank goodness, have also recognized how this military establishment and the military elite are not doing anything in terms of advancing the interests of the country, the dignity of the country, and of course, social justice at home. This has been an issue that in fact the military elite has always attempted to sell itself as, okay, we may not be perfect, but of course we're much better, less corrupt, more meritocratic, etc., 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 than those corrupt politicians. And unfortunately, many Punjabis, probably Khan himself, probably myself, we believe that narrative. Not that the military is perfect, but at least it may be. What has happened now is that that entire narrative has collapsed, and people, even within Punjab, see the military establishment for what it is, and that, of course, is this kind of neo-colonial comprador elite that both represses the indigenous, the population in Pakistan, as well as serves the interests of imperial power abroad.
Thank you. I think, yeah, one of the most, I guess, important factors that you mentioned was that rather dissent being solely within the peripheries, now we're seeing it more of a national thing, a national conversation taking place. So, and that may be something that we haven't seen in the past. So it'd be interesting to see how this current campaign or this current narrative evolves. Melka, I have a question related to, I guess, the Pakistani regime and how it employed this authoritarianism. So you did talk about how you worked, you did some congressional work in the U.S. to try to bring to light some of the issues that were happening in Pakistan. But from, let's say I'm somebody in the Pakistani government and I would go to a congressman in the US and saying, hey, we're not actually doing transnational repression. We're just adhering to our local laws. And this person, Sean Mehdi or Mehlaqa Samdani, they broke our local laws. So that's all we're doing. We're not really harassing them or intimidating them. So what would you say is the difference between kind of a government defending its local laws versus actually going and intimidating and harassing their citizens in another country?
That's an excellent question, Sean. And I think it's very important to make clear that every country has the right to enforce their laws, right, within their jurisdiction and on their soil. Now, when the Pakistani government reaches across its borders to target people here, what they're really trying to do is infringe on US sovereignty, infringe on our constitutionally protected rights here in this country, and trying to silence that. And that is where the problem becomes, because sovereignty works both ways. So yes, Pakistan has the right to enforce its legitimate laws. And we can talk about how legitimate these PICA laws were in terms of how they are pushed through parliament without debate or discussion, how they're selectively applied, how they're extremely vague, how they, what their actual implementation looks like and everything. But I am a US citizen, you are a Canadian citizen or a resident who is living in another country, and the laws of this country apply to me. And I think that is something that we should be very, very clear about when we engage with our congressional representatives here in the US, or when you as a Canadian interact or engage with your member of parliament. It's very important to communicate to them that this is not a diaspora issue. This is a civil rights, civil liberties issue. This is a question of how well our own host countries where we are now residing, how far they will go to protect their constituents and our constitutionally protected rights to free speech, free expression, my First Amendment rights. So that is something that we need to be very proactive about when it comes to engaging with our representatives. I will say one thing, Junaid was talking about the narrative, and this narrative that we who grew up in Pakistan was sort of socialized into believing about the military, right? All of us, even though we kind of knew what they were doing, we kind of knew they were responsible for the genocide in East Pakistan, we kind of knew what was happening in Balochistan, in the peripheries, in Sindh, in KP, all of those things. Nobody really took that on except for a few very brave and courageous individuals. There were movements that Junaid referred to. And so in every era, you had those very courageous individuals. They were always branded as traitors by the rest of society. Why? Because somehow through our textbooks that the military controlled, through their revisionist histories, through their censorship within the media, we were fed this narrative about the military being the guardians of Pakistan, right? Of sort of taking care of its people and sort of being the bulwark against these corrupt, incompetent civilians. What has happened over the past few years, and I do call this the Imran Khan phenomenon, is that all of the supporters that Imran Khan had, and of course he led one of the biggest political parties in Pakistan, when he turned against the military, that is when we saw that entire shift, when for the first time we saw this mass mobilization, this mass shift in perception about the military. And that is something that is unprecedented in Pakistan. And that is something that this happened during the time of social media, where for the first time the military was not able to control this narrative. And it can't control the narrative within Pakistan, even though it's tried very hard with internet outages and with targeting critics and all of that. But also people like us, right, who are abroad, they have no way of coming out and sort of, controlling our speech. Of course, they've threatened us, they've threatened our loved ones, all of that. But, with our relationships that we have developed and cultivated with our representatives here, with our knowledge of our rights as American citizens, Canadian citizens, British citizens, we can push back, right? And so I think that's why their repression at home and their transnational repression abroad has become so aggressive, because they just don't know how to handle this sort of shift in perception.
Thank you. And I think that point you raised regarding framing activism and framing the advocacy as a civil rights issue rather than, this is what's happening in Pakistan, you need to pay attention to it and, help people in Pakistan. So I think that's very important for the viewers, for those of you in the West and elsewhere who are trying to engage with your local MPs, local politicians. The framing of the issue is super important. And as Mehlaqa advised, putting it in the contours of civil liberties might get you more might get you further than other kind of framing.
Right. Our laws are being infringed upon, and that is something that they need to focus on.
Exactly. Yeah. And specifically, the civil liberties are being infringed upon as a Canadian citizen or as an American citizen. So that way, the local or the U.S. or Canadian governments would probably take more attention to that as opposed to something that's happening outside of their environment. And I think you both alluded to this in your comments so far regarding Imran Khan and what's slightly different about his current situation against the military or versus the military. For Dr. Ahmad, I have a question regarding, I guess, Imran Khan specifically. What makes him slightly different than some of the other activism that you mentioned earlier that happened in the 60s? Why is he kind of different than those movements? And the way that we've been seeing the military treat him and his party and his supporters, does that show that political opposition in Pakistan is non-existent or is not possible? And there needs to be some, I guess, you can't really oppose the military if you're simply in a political party, or should there be some other grassroots activism, some other collaboration with other organizations across the world or region?
Yeah, I think Mehlaqa hit the nail on the head. What has made Imran Khan different than previous individuals and the political tendencies that they've represented is what I jokingly say, that, myself and my comrades on the left, what we have tried to do for 70 years, which is to try to convince Punjabis that the military is not this pristine institution in working in the interests of the population. Khan, and the way he's been persecuted, has been able to achieve in about 1 or 2 years. He's been able to convince Punjabis that no, just like the other provinces have always known, that the military does not play some benign role, but a very malign role in Pakistani politics. That is what has distinguished this moment from previous ones. Even if we go back to Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and his emergence, we have to recognize that in some ways, the military itself was so disgraced because of what happened in East Pakistan and what became Bangladesh. It was very easy for Bhutto to come there in power and in some ways almost rehabilitate a military that was so humiliated in East Pakistan. Why I feel that Khan is being so brutally persecuted and punished is that is what he has accomplished. That all of these Punjabis, all of the Punjabis, my part of the Punjab, etc., that has always been expected to love or at least respect the military, has completely lost that. I mean, they detest what the military is doing domestically vis-a-vis specifically Khan, but now they can see it. The way with the vengeance and brutality that they are going after anyone that, as Mehlaqa was saying, is opposing the type of authoritarian rule and just declaring these people as traitors, as treasonous, and so forth, and so forth. And so I think that that's what makes him uniquely different. He has been able to usurp the whole idea of Pakistaniyat, Pakistani identity, Pakistani patriotism, Pakistani nationalism, it is no longer this idea of the military, and as Mehlaqa was saying in the history books about just being, well, we are just anti-India, we are anti-Hindu, we are anti-blah blah blah. No, that the Pakistani project has to be about some type of a social justice project. That the Pakistani project has to be about, yes, an independent foreign policy, not one that means being at loggerheads or being antagonistic or war with other countries. But as Khan famously says, we'll be friends with everyone, whether it's Washington or Beijing or whoever, in times of peace, but we just cannot be in times of war, representing that fundamental pacifist view. I mean, no one can deny this, that Khan has always had, emerging right from the beginning of the war on terror years, the war in Afghanistan specifically. And so that is what has made him, I mean, you know, great politicians. Well, great, maybe Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and Jinnah, not, not too many other great ones. But that is what has made this moment very different from previous moments. And it's Khan, of course. And I think that often people will say, hey, we're personalizing this in the figure of Khan. Khan is Khan, and what he is going through, it's incredibly, um, I mean, it's incredibly courageous and brave, and we are all so, obviously saddened by what's going on specifically, but it's what Khan represents to millions upon millions of people within the country, outside of the country. The extraordinary thing is that, yes, this man is putting his life on the line for something he fundamentally believes and what fundamentally Pakistanis believe as well. They have finally found an individual, a political tendency that actually represents and advances those things. What he has been able to do since the early 2000s, especially after 2010s, is repoliticize a society that had been just so disoriented, so disenfranchised over the course of the 1990s. Even when Musharraf comes to power, it's like, again, who's the alternative? Which political tendency individual is actually talking about social justice at home, independent foreign policy? There is no one. And so that's the gap and the vacuum that Khan fills. And then you see so many young people, and not just young people, all of Pakistan, finally feeling that we no longer have to remain just as spectators in this, clown show of these elite politicians, but we can be participants in a functioning democracy. That was the hope. And they see that when that does happen, how the state responds in such a brutal and heavy-handed way.
Amazing. And I guess you can look at this in two ways: glass half full, glass half empty. And I kind of lie in the first camp. Some people say that, okay, we've had this national awakening. People are started talking about this issue that they've never talked about before. It's seeped into different strata of society that it wasn't there before. But then there's a counter argument, and people say, well, so what? The military still has power. The military still has the guns. They can pick a judge, remove a judge. So the question is, I guess, how or will things change in this current context? And this is a question for either of you, for whoever wants to answer it first, but maybe Dr. Ahmed, if you want to go first.
Sure. So this, yeah, I mean, this is the heart of the matter, right? I mean, I think that even if you have mass sentiment now converging on the idea that yes, the military establishment is an incredibly malignant force in Pakistani politics. What do you do about this incredibly powerful and omnipresent institution in society? And this is in some ways getting us to the moment that we're in right now. We talk about the whole discourse post World War II about how the countries, they should be evaluated in terms of the kind of the development indices that we've observed and so on and so forth. And today, to be very blunt, the only kind of reason that Pakistan is quote unquote geopolitically relevant is because of its military and nuclear weapons. And that's it. And so it becomes this, it is an incredibly difficult situation, especially because you have the great powers, especially the United States, the Gulf countries, and so on, being impressed and reliant on this military to do their bidding. And therefore, you don't expect any help from the outside in this confrontation with the military. And we do our best, of course, as Mehlaqa is doing, but that's kind of the real dilemma we face. And so internally, the issue, I think, and from my own experience, from my students, what they tell me, including those that are actually within the military and so on, is that this particular individual in charge right now, he has instilled so much fear within the military ranks itself. I mean, a lot of these we should remember and emphasize. Officers, particularly in the mid-rank junior officers, were incredibly sympathetic to Khan. This was so well known; it's not even a secret that this is why our wonderful field marshal had to engage in like such type of a purge within the military itself. So I think that and obviously, there's two things. One is that despite obviously the type of incredibly repressive state terror that Pakistanis have to endure, they still continue to mobilize. I don't think the folks in the in the diaspora have any right to say that why aren't they mobilizing more? Why aren't they doing this? That sentiment is there. They're looking for the opportunity to do so in situations where they're not going to be completely massacred and slaughtered. And so the mass sentiment is there, and that will, I think, continue to inshallah mobilize. But I also very optimistically believe that within the institution of the military itself, in which right now we have an individual that I think in very unparalleled ways has concentrated so much power in himself and instilled so much fear within the ranks of the military that right now he's kind of on autopilot cruise control right now, assuming that no one is going to challenge him. And so my view, and people do differ on this, is that actually within the military itself, there are massive numbers of officers. Forget about soldiers who are they've been with Han for a very very long time. In terms of course, everyone knows the operations in the Northwest, the mass displacement, drone strikes, military operations. The soldiers, even but officers, mid-rank, juniors, some even seniors, they are seeing for what's going on. And the field marshal benefits, well, first from the fear that he's instilled, but again, we come back to the geopolitics. How, in fact, and this is, he's doing this, it's so, it should be so obvious. He's just positioning himself all over the world, doing the grand peacemaker. He should get about 20 Nobel Peace Prize for all the stuff he's doing. And and jokingly, but many Pakistanis actually very much enjoy the fact when he's outside of the country and going everywhere else. But this is the way he has sold himself. So it's so we should see it. I mean, I think sometimes we become hope like really hopeless at the situation. But we are literally talking about almost literally one man who has these very personalized relationships with a Trump or a Vance here and there. These folks, inshallah, will not last forever. So we have a situation, I think, where I think we should not just, not think, we should not just consider and with a broad stroke, just all of the military like this. There are very, very patriotic folks within the military that know the kind of incredible injustices and the cruelties that the field marshal is imposing, and that do believe in a Pakistan that just has much more of a social justice project at home and has much more of an independent foreign policy, as of course Khan has been advocating.
Thank you. Mehlaqa, would you like to add on?
Sure. I mean, Junaid has perfectly encapsulated everything that is so important. But, Junaid referred to that one man, Asim Munir. For everybody who's feeling extremely disheartened in this moment, I would refer you to that other man in Adiala jail, and to please draw inspiration from him at this moment, who refuses to bow down, who refuses to give up, who refuses to engage in deals. And I think we owe him that much, at least not give up hope. Yes, the conditions in Pakistan are incredibly repressive. Again, Pakistan's diplomatic moment that Asim Munir has somehow put himself at the center of, that external validation that they need to bolster their internal legitimacy, is absolutely there. But we need to know, especially those people in the diaspora, that when they are silencing voices in Pakistan, it behooves us to all the more reach out, and speak up on behalf of what's happening to the millions of Pakistanis that are being subjugated to horrible conditions. I will also say that, yes, on the one hand, he has concentrated a lot of power within himself, but at the same time, the Pakistani military has had to work all the harder to try and silence the criticism that is coming. They are spending millions and millions of dollars that they hadn't spent before in trying to counteract what's going on. I think Junaid also raised a very important point that right now the relationship is very transactional and very personalized, very individualized between Trump and Asim Munir. However, and the Republican Party as well. But midterm elections in the US are literally a couple of months away, and we're really hoping that the House flips. Their hopes that the Senate would flip as well. And if we get a Democratic majority here in the US, there is a lot more activity that will be happening in the US Congress vis-a-vis Pakistan. Many of the letters that have recently come out to denounce what's going on in Pakistan, that have focused on human rights and the rule of law, they have been signed by Democrats. Just last year in December, we had 44 Democrats sign a letter about transnational repression that was directed to Marco Rubio, talking about all the various ways that the Pakistani government is targeting critics, but also the democratic backsliding that's happening within Pakistan. Once we have our champions like Congressman Jim McGovern, like Pramila Jayapal, once their party becomes the majority, they will get chairmanships of various committees. They will be able to more freely organize hearings and briefings that they haven't been able to do as much of because of the Republican majority. So that is something that we should definitely be looking forward to. We also need to remind ourselves that this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. We're not going to get results overnight. We have seen what happened with Israel, and the way things have shifted within the US political discourse surrounding Israel and Palestine. It was unimaginable just a few years ago for anybody to talk against unconditional military aid to Israel. And just over the past 2 years, we've seen this sea change occur within Congress. Even the people who are contesting the midterms, they have to now, especially the Democrats, they have to distance themselves from the Israeli lobby in order to get the votes that they need. Just in July, there were more than 100 Democrats, and these are not just progressive Democrats, but across the spectrum Democrats who voted against $3 billion annual aid to Israel that goes through. 100, I mean, the measure failed, but the fact that there were more than 100 Democrats who voted for that is telling us. So I would keep that example in mind as well. The Pakistani military has been entrenched economically, politically, in every way for more than almost 8 decades now, right? It will take time, but I love what I see on social media as well. people are literally not willing to take their BS anymore. You see the DGISPR every now and then come up with this, press conference and just feeding the same tired old narrative to the people. And you can see just on social media how people are like just not buying it anymore. They can see right through it. So the moment might not be ripe as of this moment, like in Pakistan, for people to rise up. I'm sure, inshallah, there will be a trigger that will get them to do that. But, and again, as Junaid said, we who are sitting abroad, we should not be the ones dictating or, shaming people in terms of why are you not coming out. We just need to do our bit. We need to stop our policymakers from enabling repression in Pakistan. We should not be telling America or Canada or England. They should not be telling Pakistan what to do about its political future, but our policymakers, they can stop the enabling of repression. They can stop the military cooperation. They can go and they can sort of focus on targeted sanctions against those military and civilian leaders who are perpetrating human rights violations. We're absolutely against economic sanctions against Pakistan because that hurts ordinary people, but targeted sanctions, absolutely. So finally, I will say this to anybody who's watching: please do not lose hope. Please draw your inspiration from Imran Khan in this moment, because he has refused to give up, and we owe him that. And we owe Pakistan that. It's not just about that one man, but it's much bigger than him. But, this is just the beginning. We need to keep going.
Yeah, Sean, if I might just add, I think one of the things that the Pakistani diaspora community needs to see itself as is as an exiled political community, right? I mean, that once the Pakistanis themselves in the diaspora community sees themselves more than just, okay, something's going bad in Pakistan here and there, issue a statement, and rather see itself as part of a political movement, as we have seen historically, whether it's the ANC in South Africa. All of these movements in these countries have had a very powerful exile movement that have been mobilizing, and it's the stuff that Mehlaqa is involved in, to mobilize not just formally the politicians and the state and the governments, but civil society, churches, masjids, so on and so forth. This is what it means to be a political movement, and I think that that's one way, and the essential way, in my view, that Pakistanis in the diaspora who are against the dictatorship in Pakistan, who are in support of the political tendency and direction that Khan represents, is what they need to be, kind of how they need to perceive themselves as. I think once that idea that you're actually part of a political movement, this is not just some type of a charitable act here and there that says, okay, well, this will be a little bit better than Pakistan, some this and that, but rather as a political movement that is an alliance with ordinary Pakistanis in Pakistan that want to see a completely different setup in which, yes, the military is put back into the barracks, and that ordinary people no longer. And again, of course, we use the term democracy, but even here, the debates obviously we've had over the decades of kind of what does this mean, and how we've seen the term really become almost meaningless, even in what I call the Western plutocracies or bourgeois democracies. In Pakistan, what we saw and what has been so inspiring since the 2010s is for the first time that Pakistanis, and young ones especially, feel like they have a stake in this system. They can actually be a part of it. They can, not, like I said, not just spectators, but participants. That is what Khan has been able to do. And that is what I think the diaspora population needs to see itself as. And that, in the sense that it's an even greater burden on them, which it should be, to actually be in solidarity and alliance on what's going on the ground. Once they think of themselves politically as being part of a movement, I really do think that that would then advance a project that confronts the authoritarian oppression in Pakistan in a way that will really make it feel the heat.
If I could just add something to that, Shan, I completely agree with Junaid's framing. It's so integral, so important. And I will also say, just sort of to build on that, is that the Pakistani American community for far too long, perhaps that's the case with Canadian Pakistanis as well and other diasporas, is that we've been, we all have kinship ties. We all have very strong ties to Pakistan. So we're very much focused on political developments there, what's going on, which political party is doing what. But if we really want to help Pakistan, we really need to be engaged here in the political process here in our host countries, our adoptive countries, in order to be able to bring about change in Pakistan. Because for far too long, we've had these imperial powers enable a lot of what's been going on in Pakistan. And for us to be more effective in trying to curb this democratic backsliding, we need to hold our representatives here accountable as well, and so engage in the electoral process, register to vote. You develop that relationship with your congressional representative. I know you had asked me earlier about, how there are a lot of diaspora activists, they want to do a lot, but because of the transnational repression or because of risks to their families back home, they're not able to speak out and be as vocal as they would like. But if you are engaged with your representatives, their offices, the senators, the larger civil society here that Junaid referred to, allies among the larger population, within that ecosystem, if you operate and speak out, there is a greater degree of protection that you will get, and you will be able to be more effective in that as well. So before, and there's a lot that you can do behind the scenes. You don't even have to be front and center at all times. Develop those relationships with human rights organizations, with law enforcement. When I got that legal notice, the reason immediately things began to happen in terms of my representatives writing a letter was because I already had that relationship. The reason the FBI immediately got involved in my case was because I had already developed that relationship doing my countering Islamophobia work. I had already developed a relationship with law enforcement in trying to counteract anti-Muslim sentiment here and hate crimes. So those relationships, and also relationships with the human rights community here, they all came together to support my case. So for anybody in the diaspora, whether in Canada, the US, the UK, I think it really helps to be engaged politically, socially, in larger movements in these countries. And that will not only give you a broader audience, it will also give you a veneer of protection that you need if you want to continue to speak out for Pakistan.
Sorry, Sean. I just was going to come back with one point. I mean, this is so important because I also and Mehlaqa, points to this in this nuanced way, so that people do not confuse what we are doing abroad as this type of this neo-colonial arrangement. Now we don't like you. Let's get rid of you. This is not what we're talking about. We are talking about, particularly within the United States, but other countries in the Western plutocracies, that act, as Mehlaqa says, enable these systems of cruelty and oppression through military dictatorships. And so the Hippocratic Oath, first, do no harm. And that's what we do. We do a lot of harm in countries like Pakistan and the others. That's what we're trying to do right now. The same way we've been mobilizing, obviously, on the issue of the genocide in Gaza, to stop the arming and funding and support of Israel. And that has been the case not just now, but historically from the very inception of Pakistan. So that's what we're talking about right now. We are trying to restrain our governments from enabling the worst forms of oppressors in our societies. And I think that's a very important point, because sometimes people miss that and they think that what we're talking. Please, Mehlaqa, yeah.
Absolutely, Junaid. And they call it interference. We do not want the US to engineer political outcomes in Pakistan. That is not what we're saying. What we're saying is that the US government has leverage. It has diplomatic leverage. It can determine whether it's going to use that leverage to enable repression, or whether it's going to, use that leverage to change its own policies. We can't tell Pakistan what to do, but we can change and make sure that we stick to our laws. For instance, the Leahy laws, or which prohibit financing of militaries that perpetrate human rights violations. Magnitsky targeted sanctions. We have those levers. We're not telling Pakistan what to do. We are using what's in our control, exercising or implementing our laws rather, to not enable repression. And there's a very clear distinction that really needs to be made. We're not saying this should happen in Pakistan. We're saying, well, these are our laws and we have the sovereignty to be able to implement them, not selectively, but across the board and consistently.
Thank you so much. And I think that's incredibly important points you both raised just now, that we're not asking for countries to say that, hey, we don't like this government now, so please come in and remove them because the government we like is not in power. That's completely going against what we're trying to do. And I think it's the way I like to kind of conceptualize in my head, or when I have conversations with Westerners or Canadians, is that we're just asking for Pakistan to have the same rights and same kind of society that you have here in Canada, right? Like, you wouldn't accept the Canadian Army chief to depose Trudeau, for example, and then replace him with somebody else. So I feel like that kind of, that, oh no, this is Pakistan, so they're used to that. I think that kind of mentality we need to kind of address and say that we're just asking for rights for Pakistanis as the rights are given to everybody else. And that's kind of one way I like to think about it, but feel free to
and these rights are enshrined in Pakistan's constitution. We're not saying please support American laws or import American laws. These are rights that are fundamental rights, are enshrined in Pakistan's constitution. The Pakistani government, or Pakistan itself, is a signatory to the International Civil and International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. So these are instruments, international instruments, that Pakistan has voluntarily subscribed to. So that is, if I as a Pakistani American saying, well, why is Pakistan not, upholding its own laws? We're not asking them to uphold American laws or Western laws. These are laws that Pakistan itself has signed off on.
Yeah, and I mean, that's exactly the issue. I mean, we started speaking about transnational repression, and that obviously the type of violations of international law that is that entails. But within Pakistan itself, I mean, it's become quite a farce. The judicial system there, with the type of sentences being given to, so even within Pakistan, the entire legal apparatus, everything is just been so, it's been looked with such contempt by the Field Marshal Asim Munir and others. So even within Pakistan, we're calling it this democracy. It is a dictatorship that does whatever it wants, and tells judges to give sentences however they see fit. And so we are talking about not just their lawless behavior abroad, but their lawless behavior internally as well.
Wonderful. We're 7 minutes past our scheduled end time, so I apologize to our viewers and to you both. Just to wrap up this final kind of discussion and these amazing points that we're talking about, maybe it's important to think of it as a two-pronged approach. We have to retain and keep pressure up domestically in Pakistan, as well as keep up pressure from the diaspora towards the governments that you're living in, to prevent them from enabling the repression that's taking place in Pakistan. So I think that's super, super important, and kind of like I use this metaphor for a lot of things, but a pincer approach. So from both ends, if we can conceptualize it like that, I think that might be very helpful to people who don't really know what's happening in Pakistan. Really, 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 thank you so much, both of you, for all your time. And honestly, I need to. After this is done, I'm going to go and watch the entire episode again, just so I can take in what everything that was said. It was really, really insightful. Super grateful to both of you for your time. I did have somebody in the comments was saying that why isn't this an Urdu maybe Shan can't speak Urdu. मुझे उर्दू आती है, बोल सकता हूँ, काफी कमजोर है, लेकिन बोल सकता हूँ. The point is, we're just trying to have this series in English just for our English viewers. But maybe in the future we'll have some discussions and some episodes in Urdu as well, since I think a lot of our viewers are based in Pakistan. So that was really, really appreciate everything that was discussed today. And we mentioned this point in our first episode as well, and it was brought up here in our episode today that we're not doing this because we want to dismantle the Pakistani military, or we want it to go away, or we want it to we don't want Pakistan with the military. No, all we're saying is, and all our focus is on, that Pakistani military's interference in politics needs to end, and institutions need to grow, they need to develop, they need to evolve on their own. And that's the way that the whatever reform or whatever kind of changes that we need to bring into Pakistani society, that's the way they will be better implemented. And just wanted to mention that point before we end off our episode today. But if you have any final thoughts or any comments, feel free to share them. Otherwise, thank you so much, both of you. I really appreciate your time.
Sean, just one thing. I mean, the military thing is important, because this is where a lot of folks will be getting into engaging in this debate, and I can understand all sides of it. But I think one way of just looking at this I mean, just consider if you actually had a military that served the interest not just of the Pakistan, of the global South. The genocide in Gaza. I mean, could you imagine such a huge military nuclear? What it could have done. I mean, it doesn't even just even the threat to Israel to stop the genocide in Gaza. The great things that it could do to, in fact, advance the interest not just of Pakistan, of the Muslim world, of the global South. So I put that out there just for people to say, well, yeah, I mean, it's horrible what it's doing, but what is the potential of such a military of a country of the global South? What it could do to, in fact, it be an impediment to the ongoing Western neo-colonialism that affects much of the global South. So it's an interesting kind of thought experiment that, yeah, well, if we did have a military with a decent leadership and with decent kind of objectives to serve Pakistan and humanity, wow, it could really do great things.
That's a great way to look at it, Junaid. Absolutely, the potential. And if we can only do what it was supposed to do constitutionally, then the potential could be realized. But because it's so predatory and it is so internal looking in terms of how it can take over the political landscape, it hasn't been able to do its job well. So I don't have anything more to add. I just would like to say a huge thank you to Shan. I am just so proud, even though I'm not your mother, but I'm old enough to be. I'm so proud of the work that you're doing, and it's such a wonderful thing for our generation to see this new generation of Pakistani diaspora members who are so committed to what's going on in Pakistan. They want to remain engaged, and they want to continue to inspire people of your generation. So thank you so much for everything you're doing. Your amazing father has been doing incredible work, and now you've sort of taken up that mantle as well. So it's really a joy to see, and it was lovely being here with Junaid. As always, I learned a lot.
No, and same for me. I mean, Sean, Mehlaqa, you guys are heroic. You guys are inspiring, and I think you guys give the energy to not just myself, my students, and so on, to carry on this very important work. So I'm so grateful to have joined both of you for this conversation.
Thank you. No, very kind of both of you. And honestly, we do this because of the stuff of work that both of you do. So, it's like an inspirational circle or whatever cycle. But thank you so much, both of you. And inshallah, hopefully we'll have some conversations in the future again. And looking forward to connecting and reading more of your work. Thank you.
Inshallah. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.